The story begins in a small, quiet village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. Life here was simple, and everyone knew everyone else. In this village lived an elderly man who spent most of his days sitting on a wooden bench outside his modest home. His face was lined with wrinkles, each one telling a story of a life filled with both joy and sorrow. He often gazed at the horizon, as if waiting for something, or someone. The villagers knew little about his past, only that he had arrived in the village decades ago, alone and carrying a heavy heart. One sunny afternoon, a young woman arrived in the village. She was a journalist, traveling from place to place, collecting stories of people's lives. She had heard whispers about the old man and his mysterious past. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to approach him. She introduced herself and asked if he would be willing to share his story. At first, the old man hesitated. His eyes clouded with memories, some sweet, some painful. But something about the young woman's gentle demeanor made him open up. He began to speak, his voice trembling slightly. 50 years ago, he had been a young man with a bright future ahead of him. He had a loving family, a wife, a son, and a daughter. They lived in a bustling town far from the village. Life was good, but fate had other plans. One fateful night, a terrible fire broke out in their neighborhood. The flames spread quickly, consuming everything in their path. In the chaos, the family got separated. The old man, then a young father, managed to escape with his son, but his wife and daughter were nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The young father searched tirelessly for his wife and daughter, but there was no trace of them. Heartbroken and desperate, he eventually gave up hope. He moved to the village with his son, hoping to start a new life. But the pain of losing half his family never left him. Over the years, his son grew up, got married, and moved away, leaving the old man alone with his memories. As the old man finished his story, tears streamed down his face. The young journalist listened intently, her heart aching for him. She asked if he had ever tried to find his wife and daughter again. The old man shook his head. "It's been too long," he said. "They're gone. I've accepted that." But the journalist wasn't so sure. She felt a strong urge to help him, to give him closure, or maybe even a miracle. The next day, the journalist began her search. She started by visiting the town where the old man had lived before the fire. The town had changed a lot over the years, but she managed to find some elderly residents who remembered the fire. They told her that many families had been displaced, and some had moved to other towns or cities. The journalist spent weeks tracking down leads, following every possible clue. She visited archives, spoke to historians, and even reached out to people on social media. One day, she received a message from a woman who lived in a city several hundred miles away. The woman said that her mother had often spoken about a fire that had separated her from her husband and son many years ago. The journalist's heart raced as she arranged a meeting with the woman and her mother. When they finally met, the elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the journalist's story. She confirmed that she had been separated from her husband and son in the fire. She had searched for them for years but eventually gave up, believing they were gone. She had remarried and started a new life, but the pain of losing her first family had never left her. The journalist knew she had found the old man's wife. She arranged for the two to meet, keeping it a surprise for the old man. The day of the reunion arrived, and the journalist brought the elderly woman to the village. As they approached the old man's home, the woman's hands trembled with anticipation. The old man was sitting on his bench, just as he always did. When he saw the woman, his eyes widened in disbelief. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking. The woman ran to him, and they embraced, tears streaming down their faces. After 50 long years, they were finally reunited. But the story didn't end there. The elderly woman revealed that she had given birth to a daughter shortly after the fire. The daughter had grown up not knowing her father or brother. The journalist, now more determined than ever, set out to find the daughter. Her search led her to a small town where the daughter, now a grandmother herself, lived with her family. When the journalist explained the situation, the daughter was overwhelmed with emotion. She had always wondered about her father and brother but had never imagined she would find them. The journalist arranged for the daughter to meet her father and brother. The reunion was filled with tears, laughter, and a sense of closure that had been missing for half a century. The old man, now surrounded by his wife, son, and daughter, felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. The family spent days catching up, sharing stories, and making up for lost time. The village, once a place of solitude for the old man, now buzzed with the joy of a family reunited. The journalist, though her role in the story was over, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only given an old man his family back but had also witnessed the power of hope, perseverance, and love. As she left the village, she knew this was a story she would never forget, a story of a family that thought they had lost everything, only to find it again after 50 long years. The days following the reunion were filled with a mix of emotions, joy, disbelief, and a sense of wonder. The old man, who had spent decades carrying the weight of loss, now found himself surrounded by the family he thought he would never see again. His wife, though aged and frail, had the same sparkle in her eyes that he remembered from their youth. His daughter, now a grandmother herself, brought with her a warmth and energy that filled the small village home with life. And his son, who had grown into a man with his own family, stood by his side, sharing in the miracle of their reunion. The village, which had always been quiet and uneventful, suddenly became the center of a story that felt like it was straight out of a fairy tale. Neighbors gathered around, curious and eager to hear the details of how this family had found each other after so many years. The old man, though usually reserved, found himself sharing bits and pieces of his past, his voice trembling with emotion as he spoke of the fire that had torn them apart. The journalist, who had played a crucial role in bringing the family together, stayed in the village for a few more days. She wanted to document their story, not just for her work, but as a way to honor the resilience and love that had kept this family connected, even when they were apart. She spent hours talking to each family member, listening to their memories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. The old man's wife, who had remarried after the fire, shared her side of the story. She spoke of the nights she had spent crying, wondering if her husband and son were alive. She had tried to move on, building a new life with a kind man who had helped her raise her daughter. But the pain of losing her first family had never fully healed. When the journalist had reached out to her, she had been hesitant at first, afraid to reopen old wounds. But something deep inside her had urged her to take the chance, and now she was grateful she had. The daughter, who had grown up knowing only half of her family, spoke of the questions that had haunted her throughout her life. She had always felt a void, a missing piece of her identity. Meeting her father and brother for the first time was overwhelming, but it also brought her a sense of completeness she had never known. She brought her own children and grandchildren to the village, introducing them to the family they never knew they had. The old man, now a great-grandfather, beamed with pride as he held his great-grandchildren in his arms. The son, who had been just a boy when the fire happened, shared his memories of that tragic night. He remembered the chaos, the smoke, and the fear. He remembered his father's desperate search for his mother and sister, and the heartbreak of realizing they were gone. Growing up without them had been hard, but he had tried to honor their memory by building a good life for himself. Seeing his mother and sister again was like a dream come true, and he couldn't stop thanking the journalist for making it happen. As the days passed, the family began to settle into a new rhythm. They spent hours talking, laughing, and catching up on the years they had missed. They shared old photographs, some faded and torn, but precious nonetheless. The old man's wife brought out a small box of keepsakes she had saved from their life before the fire, a locket, a few letters, and a handkerchief with his initials embroidered on it. The old man held the items in his hands, his eyes filling with tears as he remembered the life they had once shared. The journalist, though she was there to document their story, found herself becoming a part of it. The family welcomed her with open arms, grateful for the role she had played in bringing them together. She felt a deep connection to them, and she knew this was a story that would stay with her forever. She often found herself thinking about the power of love and hope, and how they had kept this family connected, even when they were worlds apart. One evening, as the sun set over the village, the family gathered outside the old man's home. They sat in a circle, sharing stories and memories. The old man, who had always been a man of few words, found himself speaking more than he had in years. He talked about the day he had met his wife, how he had been instantly drawn to her kindness and strength. He talked about the birth of their children, and how proud he had been to be a father. And he talked about the fire, and the years of pain and loneliness that had followed. But now, as he looked around at his family, he felt a sense of peace. He knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but they had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. His wife reached out and took his hand, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. Their daughter and son sat beside them, their own families gathered around, creating a circle of love and connection that had been broken for far too long. The journalist watched from a distance, her heart full. She knew that this was a story that would inspire others, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. She thought about all the people in the world who had lost loved ones, who were searching for answers, and who were holding on to the hope of a reunion. This family's story was proof that miracles could happen, and that love could endure, even after 50 years. As the night grew darker, the family continued to talk and laugh, their voices carrying through the quiet village. The old man looked up at the stars, his heart filled with gratitude. He had spent so many years waiting, hoping, and praying for this moment. And now, as he sat surrounded by the people he loved most, he knew that his prayers had been answered. The family that had thought they lost everything had found each other again, and their story was just beginning. The days turned into weeks, and the family continued to bask in the joy of their reunion. The old man's small home, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with laughter, chatter, and the pitter-patter of children's feet. His daughter and her family had decided to stay in the village for a while, wanting to make up for the lost time. His son, who lived in a nearby town, visited often, bringing his own family along. The old man's wife, though she had a life and family in another city, chose to stay with him, rekindling the bond they had shared so many years ago. The village, which had always been a close-knit community, embraced the family's story with open hearts. Neighbors brought food, shared stories, and offered their help in any way they could. The old man, who had always been a quiet and reserved figure, found himself at the center of attention, but he didn't mind. For the first time in decades, he felt alive, his heart full of love and gratitude. One afternoon, the family decided to take a trip to the town where they had once lived before the fire. It was a place filled with memories, both happy and painful. The old man hadn't been back in years, and the thought of returning filled him with a mix of emotions. But he knew it was important, not just for him, but for his wife and children as well. As they drove into the town, the old man's wife gasped. The place had changed so much over the years. The bustling streets they had once known were now lined with modern buildings and shops. The neighborhood where they had lived was gone, replaced by a park. But as they walked through the park, memories came flooding back. The old man pointed to a spot where their house had once stood. He closed his eyes and could almost see it, the small but cozy home where they had shared so many happy moments. The family sat on a bench, looking out at the park. The old man's wife held his hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I'd see this place again," she said softly. The old man nodded, his own eyes misty. "Neither did I," he replied. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The daughter, who had no memories of this place, listened intently as her parents shared stories of their life before the fire. She felt a deep connection to this place, even though she had never been here before. After spending some time in the park, the family decided to visit the local church, where the old man and his wife had been married. The church was still standing, though it had been renovated over the years. As they walked inside, the old man's wife let out a small cry. "It's just as beautiful as I remember," she said, her voice trembling. They lit a candle and said a prayer, thanking God for bringing them back together. The trip to the town was emotional, but it was also healing. It helped the family reconnect with their past and find closure. As they drove back to the village, the old man felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew that the pain of the past would never fully go away, but being surrounded by his family made it easier to bear. Back in the village, life continued in its simple, unhurried way. The old man's daughter and her family had become a part of the community, and the villagers welcomed them with open arms. The daughter, who had always lived in the city, found herself falling in love with the village's slow pace and natural beauty. She often took long walks with her children, exploring the hills and forests that surrounded the village. Her husband, who had been hesitant about staying in the village at first, soon grew to appreciate its charm. The old man's son, who had always been close to his father, spent as much time as he could in the village. He brought his own children, who quickly bonded with their cousins. The old man loved watching his grandchildren play together, their laughter filling the air. It was a joy he had never thought he would experience. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the old man's wife suggested they plant a tree in the village to mark their reunion. "It will be a symbol of our love and resilience," she said. The family loved the idea, and the next day, they set out to find the perfect spot. They chose a quiet corner near the old man's home, where the tree would have plenty of space to grow. Together, they dug a hole, placed the sapling in it, and covered it with soil. Each family member took turns watering the tree, making a wish as they did so. The old man stood back and watched as his family worked together, his heart swelling with pride. He thought about the journey they had been on, the years of pain and separation, and the miracle that had brought them back together. He knew that the tree would grow tall and strong, just like their family. As the days turned into weeks, the family continued to build new memories together. They celebrated birthdays, shared meals, and told stories late into the night. The old man, who had once spent his days alone, now found himself surrounded by love and laughter. He often thought about the journalist who had made it all possible, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude towards her. The journalist, though she had returned to her work, kept in touch with the family. She often called to check on them, and they sent her photos and updates. She knew that their story was far from over, and she looked forward to seeing how it would unfold. As the family's tree grew, so did their bond. They knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but they were determined to make the most of the time they had now. The old man often sat under the tree, looking out at the village and the hills beyond. He felt a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the family he thought he had lost forever. And so, the family that had been torn apart by tragedy was brought back together by love, hope, and a little bit of luck. Their story was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of light, and that miracles can happen when you least expect them. The old man knew that their journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had his family by his side. As the weeks turned into months, the family settled into a new rhythm, one that was filled with love, laughter, and a deep sense of gratitude. The old man, who had once spent his days in solitude, now found himself surrounded by the bustling energy of his growing family. His wife, though she had a life in another city, chose to stay with him in the village, rekindling the bond they had shared so many years ago. Their daughter and her family had also decided to make the village their home, at least for the time being, and their presence brought a new sense of vitality to the old man's life. The village, which had always been a quiet and close-knit community, embraced the family with open arms. The villagers, who had known the old man as a solitary figure, were overjoyed to see him surrounded by his loved ones. They often stopped by to visit, bringing gifts of food and sharing stories of their own lives. The old man's home, once a place of quiet reflection, was now a hub of activity, filled with the sounds of children playing, conversations, and laughter. One day, the old man's daughter suggested they organize a small celebration to thank the villagers for their kindness and support. The family loved the idea, and they began planning a simple gathering. They decided to hold it in the village square, where they could invite everyone to join them. The old man's wife took charge of the preparations, with the help of her daughter and daughter-in-law. They cooked traditional dishes, decorated the square with flowers, and set up tables and chairs for the guests. On the day of the celebration, the village square was filled with people. The old man, dressed in his best clothes, stood at the center of it all, his heart swelling with pride. He looked around at the faces of his family and friends, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had spent so many years alone, but now he was surrounded by the people he loved most. The celebration began with a speech from the old man's son, who thanked the villagers for their kindness and support. He spoke about the journey his family had been on, the years of pain and separation, and the miracle that had brought them back together. His words were met with applause and tears, as the villagers listened intently, moved by the family's story. After the speech, the family served food and drinks, and the celebration continued late into the night. There was music, dancing, and laughter, as the villagers and the family came together to celebrate the joy of reunion. The old man, though he was not one for dancing, found himself swaying to the music, his wife by his side. He looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, feeling a deep sense of contentment. As the night wore on, the old man's daughter approached him with a small box in her hands. "We have something for you," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. The old man opened the box to find a photo album, filled with pictures of their family. There were old photographs from before the fire, as well as new ones taken since their reunion. The old man flipped through the pages, his eyes filling with tears as he looked at the images of his family, both past and present. "We wanted to give you something to remember this day," his daughter said softly. The old man nodded, unable to speak. He held the album close to his heart, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but the memories they were creating now were precious, and he was determined to cherish them. The celebration was a turning point for the family. It brought them even closer together, and it strengthened their bond with the village. The old man, who had once been a solitary figure, now felt like he was a part of something bigger, a community that cared for him and his family. In the days that followed, the family continued to build new memories together. They took trips to nearby towns, explored the hills and forests around the village, and spent hours talking and laughing. The old man's wife, who had always been a city dweller, found herself falling in love with the village's slow pace and natural beauty. She often took long walks with her daughter, sharing stories and memories as they went. The old man's son, who had always been close to his father, spent as much time as he could in the village. He brought his own children, who quickly bonded with their cousins. The old man loved watching his grandchildren play together, their laughter filling the air. It was a joy he had never thought he would experience. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the old man's wife suggested they start a new tradition. "Why don't we have a family dinner every Sunday?" she asked. The family loved the idea, and they decided to make it a weekly event. Each Sunday, they would gather around the table, sharing food, stories, and laughter. It became a time for them to connect, to celebrate their love for each other, and to reflect on the journey they had been on. The old man often thought about the journalist who had made it all possible. He felt a deep sense of gratitude towards her, and he often wondered how he could thank her. One day, he decided to write her a letter, expressing his gratitude and sharing the joy he felt at being reunited with his family. He wrote about the celebration in the village, the photo album his daughter had given him, and the new traditions they were creating. He ended the letter with a simple but heartfelt thank you, knowing that words could never fully express the depth of his gratitude. As the days turned into weeks, the family continued to build a new life together, one that was filled with love, laughter, and a deep sense of gratitude. They knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but they were determined to make the most of the time they had now. The old man often sat under the tree they had planted, looking out at the village and the hills beyond. He felt a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the family he thought he had lost forever. And so, the family that had been torn apart by tragedy was brought back together by love, hope, and a little bit of luck. Their story was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of light, and that miracles can happen when you least expect them. The old man knew that their journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had his family by his side. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of life in the village. The family, now firmly rooted in their new reality, continued to build a life filled with love, laughter, and shared memories. The old man, who had once spent his days in quiet solitude, now found himself at the center of a bustling household. His wife, daughter, and son, along with their families, had become an integral part of the village, and their presence brought a new sense of energy and joy to the community. One crisp autumn morning, the old man woke up to the sound of children laughing outside his window. He smiled as he looked out and saw his grandchildren playing in the yard, their cheeks rosy from the cool air. His wife was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the house. The old man took a deep breath, savoring the moment. He had spent so many years alone, but now his life was filled with the simple joys of family. After breakfast, the family gathered in the living room to discuss their plans for the day. The old man's daughter suggested they take a trip to the nearby lake, a place she had heard about from the villagers. "It's supposed to be beautiful this time of year," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The family agreed, and soon they were packing a picnic and heading out for the day. The lake was indeed breathtaking, surrounded by trees with leaves that had turned shades of gold and red. The family spread out a blanket on the grass and enjoyed their picnic, laughing and talking as they ate. Afterward, the children ran to the water's edge, skipping stones and chasing each other. The old man and his wife sat together, watching their grandchildren play. "It's moments like these that make life worth living," the old man said softly, his voice filled with emotion. His wife nodded, squeezing his hand. As the day went on, the family explored the area around the lake, taking in the beauty of nature. The old man's son brought a camera and took photos of everyone, capturing the joy and love that filled the day. The old man couldn't remember the last time he had felt so happy, so at peace. He knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but moments like these made the pain of the past feel a little lighter. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, they talked about their day at the lake. The old man's grandchildren excitedly shared stories of their adventures, their faces glowing with happiness. The old man listened, his heart full. He knew that these moments were precious, and he was determined to cherish every one of them. As the weeks passed, the family continued to create new memories together. They celebrated birthdays, holidays, and simple everyday moments. The old man's wife, who had always been a city dweller, found herself falling more in love with the village and its slow pace of life. She often took long walks with her daughter, exploring the hills and forests that surrounded the village. The old man's son, who had always been close to his father, spent as much time as he could in the village, bringing his own family and creating new traditions. One day, the old man's daughter suggested they start a family garden. "It will be a way for us to work together and create something beautiful," she said. The family loved the idea, and soon they were clearing a patch of land near the old man's home. They planted vegetables, flowers, and herbs, working together to tend to the garden. The old man, who had always loved gardening, found joy in teaching his grandchildren how to care for the plants. He showed them how to plant seeds, water the soil, and pull weeds, passing on his knowledge and love for nature. The garden became a symbol of the family's love and resilience. It was a place where they could come together, work side by side, and watch something grow. The old man often sat in the garden, looking at the plants and thinking about how far they had come. He knew that the garden, like their family, would continue to grow and flourish, even in the face of challenges. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the old man's wife suggested they invite the journalist who had helped reunite them to visit. "We owe her so much," she said. "It would be nice to thank her in person." The family agreed, and the old man's daughter reached out to the journalist, inviting her to the village. A few weeks later, the journalist arrived, greeted by the warm smiles and open arms of the family. She was overwhelmed by the love and gratitude they showed her. The old man took her hand and thanked her, his voice trembling with emotion. "You gave us back our family," he said. "We will never be able to thank you enough." The journalist spent a few days with the family, documenting their story and sharing in their joy. She was moved by the love and resilience they had shown, and she knew that their story would inspire others. As she prepared to leave, the family gathered to say goodbye. The old man's wife handed her a small gift, a photo album filled with pictures of their family. "This is for you," she said. "To remind you of the love and hope you helped bring back into our lives." The journalist hugged each member of the family, her heart full. She knew that their story was far from over, and she looked forward to seeing how it would continue to unfold. As she drove away from the village, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had played a part in bringing this family back together. Back in the village, life continued in its simple, unhurried way. The family, now stronger than ever, continued to build a life filled with love, laughter, and shared memories. They knew that the years they had lost could never be replaced, but they were determined to make the most of the time they had now. The old man often sat under the tree they had planted, looking out at the village and the hills beyond. He felt a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the family he thought he had lost forever. And so, the family that had been torn apart by tragedy was brought back together by love, hope, and a little bit of luck. Their story was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of light, and that miracles can happen when you least expect them. The old man knew that their journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had his family by his side. The days leading up to the reunion were filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The family had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it was finally here, it felt surreal. The old man, who had spent decades searching for his lost family, could hardly believe that the day had come. His heart raced as he packed his bags, his hands trembling slightly as he folded the same old photograph he had carried with him for 50 years. The woman, now grown with children of her own, felt a similar whirlwind of emotions. She had spent her life wondering about her roots, and now, she was about to meet the man who had never stopped looking for her. The journey to the reunion location was long, but neither of them minded. The old man sat by the window of the train, staring out at the passing landscapes. His mind wandered back to the day he had last seen his family. He remembered the chaos, the fear, and the overwhelming sense of loss. But now, as the train moved closer to its destination, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had spent so many years searching, and now, he was finally going home. On the other side, the woman and her family were also on their way. Her children, who had grown up hearing stories about their grandfather, were eager to meet him. They had seen the old photograph countless times, and now, they were about to see the man in person. The woman held her husband's hand tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent her life wondering about her father, and now, she was about to meet him. When the train finally arrived at the station, the old man stepped off slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd. He had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, he felt a wave of anxiety. What if she didn't recognize him? What if she had changed her mind? But as he walked further into the station, he saw her. She was standing there, just as he had imagined, her eyes searching for him. When their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, staring at each other, as if trying to make sure that this was real. And then, slowly, they began to walk towards each other. The old man's steps were shaky, but he didn't stop. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she kept walking. And then, finally, they were standing face to face. The old man reached out his hand, his fingers trembling as he touched her face. "Is it really you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, it's me," she said softly. And then, without another word, they embraced. It was a hug that had been 50 years in the making, a hug that said everything words couldn't. The children watched from a distance, their eyes wide with wonder. They had never seen their mother like this before, and they could feel the weight of the moment. Even the husband, who had always been the strong one, felt a lump in his throat. This was more than just a reunion, it was a moment of healing, a moment of closure. As they left the station and headed to the old man's home, the atmosphere was filled with a mix of emotions. There was joy, of course, but there was also a sense of sadness for all the years they had lost. The old man couldn't stop looking at his daughter, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. She, in turn, kept glancing at him, still trying to process the fact that he was really here. When they arrived at the old man's small house, he led them inside, his hands shaking as he unlocked the door. The house was simple, but it was filled with memories. There were photographs on the walls, some old and faded, others more recent. The woman walked slowly through the house, her eyes taking in every detail. She stopped in front of a photograph of her as a child, her heart aching as she realized how much time had passed. The old man watched her, his eyes filled with love and regret. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner." The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "You found me now," she said. "That's all that matters." That night, they sat together as a family for the first time in 50 years. The old man told stories about the past, about the life they had once shared. The woman listened intently, her heart breaking for the man who had spent his life searching for her. And as they talked, they began to rebuild the bond that had been broken so many years ago. It wasn't easy, of course. There were moments of sadness, moments of regret. But there were also moments of joy, moments of laughter. And through it all, they held on to each other, knowing that they had been given a second chance. The journey home had been long, but it had been worth it. They were finally together, and that was all that mattered. The days that followed the reunion were a blur of emotions, conversations, and shared memories. The old man and his daughter spent hours talking, catching up on the decades they had lost. They laughed, they cried, and they slowly began to fill in the gaps of each other's lives. The woman told him about her childhood, her struggles, and the life she had built for herself. The old man listened intently, his heart swelling with pride for the strong, resilient woman she had become. He shared stories of his own journey, the years of searching, and the moments of hope and despair that had kept him going. The grandchildren, who had been shy at first, quickly warmed up to their grandfather. They were fascinated by his stories and the old photographs he showed them. They asked him endless questions about the past, and he answered them with patience and love. For the first time in his life, the old man felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a man who had lost everything, he was a grandfather, a father, and a part of a family again. The woman, too, felt a profound sense of peace. For years, she had carried a void in her heart, a longing for the family she had lost. But now, that void was slowly being filled. She watched her children bond with their grandfather, and it brought her a joy she had never known. She realized that this wasn't just a reunion, it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. As the days turned into weeks, the family settled into a routine. They spent their mornings together, sharing meals and stories. In the afternoons, they explored the old man's town, visiting places that held memories of his past. The woman was amazed at how much the town had changed, yet how familiar it felt. She could see glimpses of her childhood in the streets, the buildings, and the people they met. One day, the old man took them to the place where he had last seen his family all those years ago. It was a quiet spot by the river, surrounded by trees and wildflowers. He stood there for a moment, his eyes filled with tears. "This is where I lost you," he said softly. "But it's also where I found hope. Every time I came here, I would pray that one day, I would see you again." The woman stood beside him, her heart heavy with emotion. She had no memory of this place, but she could feel its significance. She took his hand and squeezed it gently. "You never gave up," she said. "And because of that, we're here together now." The children played by the river, their laughter echoing through the air. The old man watched them, a smile on his face. "They remind me of you," he said to his daughter. "So full of life, so full of hope." The woman smiled back, her heart swelling with love for her father and her children. As the sun set, they sat by the river, sharing stories and dreams. The old man talked about his hopes for the future, about the time he wanted to spend with his family. The woman listened, her heart filled with gratitude. She knew that they had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, the old man raised his glass. "To family," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To the past, the present, and the future. We may have lost time, but we found each other. And that's all that matters." The family raised their glasses, their eyes filled with tears. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they also knew that they had each other. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the family began to make plans for the future. The woman and her husband decided to move closer to the old man, so they could spend more time together. The children were thrilled at the idea of living near their grandfather, and the old man was overjoyed at the thought of having his family close by. They started making new memories together, from simple moments like cooking meals and playing games, to bigger adventures like traveling to new places. The old man, who had spent so many years alone, now had a house filled with laughter and love. He cherished every moment, knowing how precious they were. The woman, too, found a new sense of purpose. She had spent so much of her life searching for answers, and now that she had found them, she felt a sense of closure. She began to focus on the present, on building a life with her family and creating new memories. As the months passed, the bond between the old man and his daughter grew stronger. They had been through so much, but they had come out the other side together. They knew that they couldn't change the past, but they could shape the future. And that's exactly what they did. The story of their reunion spread through the town, inspiring others who had lost hope. People would stop the old man on the street, asking him about his journey and how he had never given up. He would smile and tell them, "Love is stronger than time. If you hold on to hope, anything is possible." For the family, the reunion was more than just a moment in time, it was a turning point. It was a reminder that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how far apart we may be, the bonds of family can never be broken. They had been given a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it. As they looked to the future, they knew that there would be challenges ahead. But they also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The journey had been long, but it had brought them to where they were meant to be. Together. And so, the family that had once thought they lost everything found something even greater, a love that had stood the test of time, and a future filled with hope. They were no longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they had found. And that was the greatest gift of all.